Oh, we're live. The broadcast is live. Welcome everybody to the Domestic Abuse Awareness panel. It's a really exciting panel that we've got lined up for you here today. We've got Rita Hirani, who is a freelance consultant in the domestic violence sector. We've got Meena Kumari from Hope Training, who has extensive experience in this sector. We have Bhavna Sharma, who is a junior doctor in the Northwest. And we have two incredible survivors of domestic abuse, Jayashree Adnath and Tina Kenworthy, who have very, very interesting experiences and stories and empowering messages to share with you all. So the purpose of today's session is to give you all an introduction and awareness of domestic abuse. So it's a very fluid discussion, and we really want you to just take away some of the key points of what the sector is about and what some of the survivors go through and what services are available. We're going to start with some slides talking around what domestic abuse is and some stats and some figures, just to put some context around the discussion so that when our other panelists join in, it gives you a more deeper understanding of how widespread it is and what is going on out there for our communities. So we just get the slides up. We've got the slides. Okay, so I'm just waiting for the slides to load. Apologies for this technical little hitch. Okay, so domestic abuse is basically, if you want to know a definition about domestic abuse, it's basically an incident or a pattern of incidents where there is coercive, controlling, threatening behaviour or violence that occurs between those aged between 16 or over, who are in an intimate relationship or between family members, regardless of their gender or sexuality. So the abuse could include psychological, physical abuse, sexual, financial, or emotional abuse. But often what we see in the work that we do with women in South Asian communities is it goes beyond this government definition, where there's often a spiritual abuse and other types of cultural abuse involved. What would you say, Meena? What have you seen in your experience?
I mean, the definition is incredibly wide, which is absolutely great. It does miss parts that may impact certain communities. We've also got to be really mindful that we do have the Domestic Abuse Act, which was the bill, but the act which is due to kind of get final kind of clearance, and the definition will be updated. However, unfortunately, that definition, the new definition, also doesn't include spiritual abuse. And unfortunately, the government didn't go far enough to consider migrant women and women with no recourse to public funds. So we do have some really good aspects of the definition that you can definitely utilise, and there's some aspects that we need to do better at as a nation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And you know, one of the things that, you know, when we've worked together, and even when I've worked, you know, on my own, sort of running mindfulness groups with South Asian women, spiritual and cultural abuse is a big thing. Jayashree, how would you say that's impacted you, spiritual or cultural abuse? Would you say that's been a factor in your experience?
For me, it has been more like physical and mental abuse, not so much spiritually, because spiritually I'm a very grounded person. I'm into mindfulness and meditation, that sort of thing. I've done extensive work on that. But when you go through experiences that are emotionally wounding, your survival skills are activated. So anything that affects both the mind and the body. So when you're affected mentally, I suffer from anxiety, depression, PTSD. And physical health, I suffer from fibromyalgia, and I've got overactive thyroid, all as a result of being chronic stress for more than 10 years. And that has been my experience. So for me, it has totally destroyed my life. And I'm starting to build myself up. I'm still going through medical issues, and it's a long journey. And I'm just so disappointed that these repercussions are not mentioned at all in the law about the effect of both mental and physical health, which domestic abuse victims go through. Thank you.
Thank you, Joshin. I will come on to some of the impact of domestic abuse on the physical and mental health as we go through the discussion. But just going back to some of the key statistics, just so that we understand in the awareness of it, how widespread domestic abuse is. Well, just to take one figure from this slide, 2 million people in the UK suffer from domestic abuse a year. That's 1.3 million female victims, and 600,000 male victims. Also, each year there are 1 million calls to the police, which is around, on average, 50 seconds there is a call to the police about domestic abuse. That's how hard it is. Now, Mina, what would you say about this? What's your experience on sort of the calls and these figures?
I think the calls give us a bit of a reality, and there is a national programme going on where police officers are being trained within domestic abuse, called Domestic Abuse Matters. It's led by the College of Policing, and there's a number of providers that are delivering it. But the reality is, Mita, what we've got to look at is those that are actually getting through to the police, making that phone call and actually getting through and giving a statement, or actually having officers that come to their home to actually see what's actually happening. We've also got women where English may not be their first language. They may have immigration issues where they are reliant on their spouse. So they may not contact the police. And also you've got to recognise some people are still, they are fearful of the state, and racism will play a large part in this as well. So all of those factors have to be factored in on whether people are reporting or not reporting. It's great to see the data there. But just like sexual violence and sexual abuse, I think domestic abuse is heavily underreported. And there's so many factors why. And the statistics that we do have, they are very generalised statistics. What we need services and the data to be broken down, not using a BAME category, but actually breaking it down by people's race and ethnicity. So ONS will do that via age and kind of ethnicity and sexuality and disability. However, we need to see this a lot more, and also factor in such things such as forced marriages, so-called honour-based abuse, and as well as female genital mutilation, which we also know does happen in a number of communities, not just one particular community.
Thank you, Mina. So what you're saying is these figures could be quite optimistic. They could actually be a lot higher, because often domestic abuse isn't reported because of various cultural barriers. And what I find really, really interesting in this is, victims at high risk of serious harm or murder live with domestic abuse for 2 to 3 years before even getting help. So often, people will say, why don't you just leave? It's not that easy. And is it harder for a South Asian heritage woman, for example, to leave a domestic abuse situation? I'm going to put that question to you, Tina.
Yeah, it is hard because it's too much burden on as a woman. You make to feel you are not a good mother, you are not a good wife, you can't keep your house together. So all the blames goes to you. But if you go and say you can't ask for help because you feeling ashamed of everything, and it's really, really hard. The only thing they say to you, leave him. But how are you going to leave him? You are not financially secure. You are not physically well enough. Mentally, you are drained. You've been left with kids most of the time because you can't be bothered to look after kids, look after him, or, you expect to be his slave. And I really don't understand. It's very easy to say, leave him. But you are not working. You are 24/7 home looking after his kids. He's not financially providing you.
Mm.
And mentally, you are so drained. Every
Mm.
day you're thinking about what's going to happen tomorrow, how you're going to survive tomorrow.
Mm.
You are mentally so drained, you can't even think about leaving him. The fear they put it in you is, if you leave me or try to leave me, I'll kill you and your kids.
Mm.
And I really don't know how they can understand, and especially when you can't even speak the language.
Yeah. Mm.
It's easy to say, but it's really not easy to live with.
Yeah, absolutely, Tina. I hear what you're saying. It's so difficult to leave, especially when you're in that survival mode, in that threat of potentially being harmed or your children being harmed. That's a horrible threat to live under. And it's interesting because, there's another figure here that's saying 7 women a month are killed by a current or former partner in England and Wales. So it goes to show, that threat is real. For a woman to leave a domestic abuse situation, it's really difficult. So when we do ask, why don't you just leave? I think we need to perhaps take a step back and be a bit more mindful of that. I'm just going to move on to another statistic here. It says 85% of victims sought help 5 times from professionals in the year before they got effective help to stop the abuse. I'm going to put this question to you, Bhavna. So, in your line of work, what do you see in terms of the services, and how do they help and support survivors or victims going through domestic abuse?
I'm really pleased that you brought that statistic up, because it is really important to recognise that it takes a lot of effort and courage an organisation to go to one place and seek that support in the first place. So it's kind of our responsibility as healthcare professionals, or in general, the support services in the UK, to help support these victims, because it can take so much from them to take that first step. And it's a bit of a shame that it takes so many organisations and so many attempts to do that. So as you mentioned, I'm a junior doctor. I've been working on kind of teaching domestic abuse and violence in the Northwest, and now nationally as well, with the support of health education in England Northwest. And we're trying to kind of educate junior doctors about what domestic abuse and violence is. As you mentioned, indicators of abuse and barriers to disclosure is a massive one that Tina talked about as well. And there's so much to it. Mm-hmm. Someone from having a cultural background that's different to a British-born individual. I guess I just want to say that in the UK in general, going to the GP, they are very well trained. A&E are very well trained on domestic abuse and violence and how to support victims. It's not the best wasn't given kind of on a general scale in medicine, and that's what we're aiming to get over. But there is support out there, and we definitely will be there to listen to you. We'll use language line, we'll use ways to kind of interpret what you're saying if you can't understand the language, and we can always direct you to where we hope we can support you.
Okay, thank you for that. I'm just going to put a question to both of the survivors about their experience of using the services. How was it for you? And what do you think could have been improved for your experience? I'm going to put that one to Jayshree first.
For me, it was having a Pakistani or Indian lady doctor who sat me down, because I kept going with pain. And when she sat me down and started talking, and then I was explaining what is happening, she said that I was going for domestic abuse, and I categorically denied it. I said, no way. Because in my mind, domestic abuse is equal to getting beaten up. And she really did a very good job to try to make me understand what it was. Because prior to me seeing her for more than 2 years, I kept being seen by a white male British man, and he only compared his own pain of having a carpal tunnel to what I was having, and didn't pick up anything. So I beg to differ on that with Dr. Bhavna, because in my case, there was a big letdown. And then I was guided to go to Freedom Program. And that was the best thing that ever happened to me, because it was then that the light bulb went in my mind, because I managed to tick all the boxes about all type of abuse I was going through, which was emotional, mental, psychological, financial abuse. And from there, then they urged me to report it as coercive control to the Leicestershire police. They let me down, and it went through 10 white men, the police force, and they closed my case without talking to third parties that was involved in coercive control case, which I was trying to report and give evidence. And that was a big disappointment. I was also volunteering as an advisor at a very well-known charity organization. My own team leader put down. So all in all, it was only a Freedom Program and UEVA who helped me flee to, which I ended up in a refuge. And these are the only support which I got, and also housing matters, because when you're financially abused, I didn't have a clue where to start, because prior to being married to him, I was a very independent person, and I used to take control of my finances and everything. But living with an abuser, they just erode your confidence, even though you know whatever they're saying is not true. That's what happened for me in my case.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Jayshree. I know Mina's going to be having to leave soon, so I'm just going to ask Mina, in your experience of the services, is this something you hear a lot from women, being let down by the services, and which ones in particular?
I mean, first of all, can we just be really clear? There is a real postcode lottery that's still going on with services, and services are really not funded properly or appropriately. And I'm really sorry to hear that Jayshree had a bad experience with certain provisions, and the experience with statutory services and charitable organisations, you know, it shouldn't be like that, especially for survivors. And a lot of survivors go into frontline practice for that particular reason. So one of the things that we saw last year in lockdown in particular was the government actually pulling the money out and funding services properly. You know, there was a lot of emergency COVID funding going on, but we can't stop there. We've got, you know, numbers of women coming in who are experiencing domestic abuse. We are, you know, we're just coming out of the levels of the pandemic, but, you know, there are still things there. We don't know what we're going to find this time next year. So what I will say about services is a lot of them are working at really reduced capacities. Sometimes their resources aren't great, but I will emphasise that when you do go to domestic abuse services, you know, they are commissioned by their local PCCs. You've got MOPAC-led services in London, and they should, all service users, regardless of their background, should be getting an appropriate service when they go to their local service.
Thank you, Mina. That's really reassuring to hear for anybody who out there listening in who feels that they want to leave, or they're, you know, and are worried about not having that support. There is plenty of support there, and there is sufficient support. So not everybody's experience is reflective of what everyone else will go through. So I'll just throw that question over to Tina. What was your experience like with services?
My experience has been mixed. I did go to live in refuge twice for 6 months with my 2 boys. I think they helped me with lots of things I was struggling with, kind of sorting out my benefits, sorting out legal side of, you know, things, getting me solicitor. So I never done that before. So it was like, yeah, you know, I can do this. I can do. They was going with me to the court. Then he was charged for common assault on me. And I'm glad I had that support that time, right time. Otherwise, he was not going to be convicted for abusing me. And I found like doctor really supported me that time. But I think my time when I was going through about 10 years ago, things were different. The one thing doctor was, they put you on medication for stress, for anxiety, because, and it's, I can understand you need that to help you. But then I was going through so much that time. Family, I was relying more on family and friend. I think they were fed up. Every 6 months we are back together. Every 6 months we are separated. But I didn't have anywhere. I couldn't break that circle. But then I started to going university, started to get education, and I did get lots of support from university every time I go with some bruises. And they said, "Oh, what's happening?" I always feel like I was living two lives. I still sometimes live two lives, one at home and one outside. I always had that mask on. Yes, this happy dinner, nothing happened. I just, had these bruises. But I was quite good hiding things because I knew if anybody finds out, I didn't want to bring that shame to my family and feel let down. And I wanted to be a brave mom. So I don't want boys to see moms being beaten up while they're sleeping, And I was hiding so much anger, fear. And that made me really stressed, mentally depressed.
Thank you for sharing that, Tina. And I'm really sorry that you've, been through all of this. But I will say that, you hit on a very important subject there, which is the shame. The shame is such a big thing that all domestic abuse victims and survivors carry. Even when they're out of the abusive situation, there is still a lot of shame, guilt, and self-blame that needs to be processed. And that's one of the impacts of domestic abuse. Mental health impact is massive. And 40% of people who have been through domestic abuse go on to then have some kind of mental health issue. So let's talk a little bit about mental health. How has your mental health been impacted, Jayashree, with the trauma and abuse that you've been through?
My mental health has been impacted quite severely because no one in my family and community could understand what I was going through. So I didn't get any support. And the way we approach mental health in my country is all about you're going to get section and that sort of thing. So I was made to be the butt of a joke for the whole family that was accessing mental health services. And for me, the best thing that ever happened to me was to go counseling with Leicester Counseling Services for 2 years. And I really enjoyed that because first time ever I was given that space to talk. And the good thing when you're having a counseling session with white women, you can say whatever you want because then you don't have to look for so as not to offend their sensibility. So I would swear, I would express my anger because I was never giving that space, even when I was in an abusive relationship, to be angry, to express my heart, feelings, and all the things that I was experiencing. So with her, I managed to sort of really let go and explain the whole thing. Yeah. But the challenge was trying to get them to understand the things about our culture. And me being spiritually minded, I know extensively about karma and the mentality that there is in our culture when you're going through abuse. So you need to go and see a priest and keep fasting and do this prayer. If you're not succeeding, it's because you're not doing your fasting enough, or that type of things that we Indian women are encouraged to go to. We're never encouraged to go and see a psychotherapist. No, you go to the priest and then you seek help from the gods, that sort of thing. So, and it was challenging for me to explain about how when an abusive marriage has ended, how his own family and friends, and then your own family and friends, they'll still point the fingers at you down several years and make us feel some sort of femme fatale. it's the marriage broke down because of you. No one points the finger at the abuser.
Yeah. It's almost the woman's fault, isn't it? Rita, I'm just going to bring you in at this point because obviously we haven't heard much from you yet, and I'm so sorry about that. What is your view on, pointing the finger at women and them being held accountable and carrying all the shame and the blame? What's your view or experience of this? Because I know you work in this sector, so you must see it a lot.
Well, definitely. When I've been working in Asian women's refuges and mainstream refuges, I'm always hearing the stories, and the stories all revolve around the women being blamed, as Jayshree and Tina have just echoed and said. But the other thing that we sometimes forget in terms of the cultural sensitivities, and as Mina earlier highlighted, that the data is underreported. With Asian women, those accidents in the home where they burn themselves, fall down the stairs, and then they're sectioned and they're like, oh, she's just gone a bit mad and she needs to go into hospital. All of those things are not recorded anywhere. And these things are unique to our women's experiences, to South Asian cultures. So what I see is that South Asian women are just invisible. They're kind of schizophrenic. And as Jayshree and Tina both mentioned earlier, when you do approach agencies, what will happen? If you manage to call the police, for example, the police will turn up at the door. They'll try to be culturally sensitive by trying to respect the culture. And what do? They go and talk to the man of the house. And is never left alone to actually say what's going on. So it's so complex and it's so multifaceted. And these are the areas that we need to raise awareness within the professionals and also encourage action so that all women have that private space to say, look, this is going on. And we shouldn't pussyfoot and tiptoe around the cultural sensitivity. That's when we actually undermine women and we lose them, and women are not getting the help.
Absolutely, Rita. There is that, silencing almost. They are invisible. Their stories are not told. That's something I see a lot of when we have this space. I mean, I've had women who have held on to stories of their abuse for 20 to 30 years, and they've only shared it for the first time in a space where they feel that they can. And they've been told, well, that's just part of your culture, just get on with it. It's one of those things we have to carry that shame, that blame, and just get on with it. And it's not right. And it's recognizing those signs as well of when this is an abusive relationship, and it's not just my husband or partner, it could be other family members, which is why it's so important we understand what domestic abuse means. It's not just the partner, it could be other family members as well. I think Jayshree wants to say something, she's got her hand up. So
just to give Rita some kind of context, what happened in my case is that after going through 10 white policemen who refused to take my statement that I was being subjected to coercive control, which was already in the law, a sergeant came to my place and said to me, well, we could see some element of abuse, but we're not really going to ruin the life of your husband if you were to pursue the case. So as regards to us women, it was as if all the men, irrespective of culture, we all rallied together, and us women were discarded. You're down there. And on top of that, all the hassles and what you get from your family and community is women tearing us apart, whereas men are around to put us down and women tear us apart. So it's kind of really contradiction in that sense. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you again, Jayshree. There is that patriarchal, bias. There's still the misogyny. All of that is still happening, and although things are changing slowly and we are talking more about it, it still needs a little bit more gusto because women are still suffering at the hands of abuse, and it's somehow, people are getting away with it. So I know we're talking a little about the mental health. I want to also talk about the physical health and the impacts domestic abuse on physical health, we know that it can affect the sexual and reproductive organs as well. I know of cases when I've worked with women where women have been forced to have abortions, or they have been kicked in their abdomen while they've been pregnant and have had stillbirth babies. So what I really want to talk about here and bring this up again, it's another taboo we just don't really talk about, is how does the sexual trauma of abuse impact a woman and sexual intimacy going forward, and even your physical health? I'm going to put that to you first, Tina, if that's okay.
Yeah, I know he was forcing on me. He was only using me for making food and for his sexual pleasure. That's all I was here for, nothing else. And when I was going to have my second child, we was always having argument, fights, but he did hit me and I had a stillbirth because of that. And I knew that, but I couldn't tell anyone. I could not tell anyone until recently I have started talking about it. I even wrote a chapter for a book as well about the story, and hopefully that book will be published soon. And which I'm feeling like he was using to control me. First of all, he didn't want that baby, so he forced me. He was trying his best to have abortion. He was sending me India to have abortion because I'd said I don't want abortion. I think that was his other way, punishing me and trying to make that baby go away, basically. And I don't think I have forgiven him for that. And I'm not gonna forget him and forgive him for that. But then sexual pleasure, I think they do. I did not suffer as much because I started to educate myself. But then I know I have been through, but I did not let that happen because I said no is no. I don't want you to use me for your pleasure. I'm not here for that.
Thank you for sharing that. It must have been so painful for you, and I'm so sorry that you went through that. It's really heartbreaking to hear. How about you, Jayshree?
Where do I start? My first marriage lasted 7 months, and that was back in Mauritius. I was raped after we got engaged, and I carried on after the marriage about being raped. And when I came out of the marriage after 7 months, thanks to my mom, she took me out, because when I got beaten up, she told me, the moment a man raises his hand on you, that is going to be how your narrative is going to be for the rest of your life. And then after a few years, I got married the second time. Both of them rushed me for marriage. And I was hoping that I was going to have a new beginning, but it turned out that I also went through marital rape, and he was gay, and he was sexually grooming young teenage boys from African countries, and even back in Mauritius, where I'm from. And it was really difficult. So you go from being raped, first marriage, and then being raped. Then afterwards, when he started getting his supply of sex, I don't know from where, we've had not having sex with me. So in 11 years of marriage, only less than 2 years we have had sex, but it was always on his term. He didn't do any foreplay, nothing. And whenever he would have sex with me, he'll just close his eyes. And now I know why, because he was perhaps fantasizing about young boys or men. And then after that, so 9 years without sex, that was the tragedy of my life. And he destroyed so many things in my life as well. So I was denied the chance of being a mother, which now I'm very grateful to him in any way, because I don't know what would have happened to the child. I have had one. So that was part of it. And sexual trauma, that's another thing. When I've been subjected to sexual molestation from child, then you go through rape. Then when you come out of it, you've never had any good sort of healthy perspective about what sex is. And the other thing is that my education, which my first husband did, he forced me to watch porn. That's not a very good place to go to. And I didn't know so many things about sex, because the way I was being sexually molested through my childhood to my teenagers, and then going through marital rape. And then after that, when you come out of all these abuses, you turn around and you're available need for other men as well. So you'll get sexually propositioned by different types of men because they saw me as available meat because I was vulnerable. But then where do you go from here? Because I don't see any book that has been written about what is your sexual identity after going through trauma, sexual trauma, and all these things. There's nothing to guide us. And even if you were to access such services, perhaps it would be a starting point in the UK, which I'm not aware of, that we have like specifically designed for that type of sexual abuse that you go throughout your lifetime, to come at a certain point where you can get a better idea. And because of these experiences, this has made me be I used to be an extrovert, now I'm a more introvert, and I have trust issues. So for me, I've sort of drawn a line about that, because for me, I've never had any help. Whatever I had to do, I did my own research and did lots of self-help exercises to get me in a better position.
Jayshree, thank you so much for sharing your heartfelt experience. And I'm so sorry for everything you have been through, really, truly. And I'm just going to ask Rita, in your experience, when we talk about sexual trauma and healing from it, what have you seen? Have you seen women come through it and then go on to enjoy sort of the intimacy or understand their identity? What have you seen in your experience?
Well, Rita, just before you answer that, could you tell us, just because I think it's amazing the kind of work that you've done, just so it adds a bit more credibility to what you're saying, tell us what you've done, and then if you can answer that question, because I think it will add a lot more weight to it.
Sure. I mean, it is 30 plus years working with women in refuges. So that aside, well, in addition to the outreach projects that I set up for Asian women, because just sidetracking a little bit. So some of the services that I set up in London was specifically because Asian women were not accessing refuges for a number of reasons. And what we needed was that space where, under the guise of coffee mornings or women's knitting circles or whatever, I got women together, and then through that peer support, women started disclosing what was going on, and then we signposted women towards looking at the options that were available to them and so on. So these were culturally specific coffee mornings that we used to have, because it was the only way of supporting. And I'm talking about 25 years ago, and thankfully things have moved on. But in terms of the sexual trauma, unfortunately, because a lot of my work was frontline work, working directly at crisis point when women turned up on the doorstep or were referred on, the time that it took, on average, women were in refuges for 1.5 years, and the time that took, they were barely starting to get their confidence together. I remember, taking a woman shopping, and she was traumatized over the frozen food counter because she could not make a decision as to what to buy. And she turned around and said to me, "Rita, I can't make a decision because whatever decision I make will be the wrong decision." Get a beating because, it's like you never can do the right thing. And that's just just like a tiny aspect of it. But in terms of the sexual trauma, I think it takes years and years and years thereafter for a number of reasons. A, we don't talk about sex within our South Asian culture. B, women aren't supposed to be sexually active before marriage. The husband is the first one, etc. All of that stuff. See, we can't even talk to our peers, our sisters. I mean, you have that sense of, I can't talk to my best friend because that's just a taboo subject. We don't talk about it. And the chances of getting an Asian, understanding, sympathetic GP when you finally go for help are also really low. And there are women GPs who still have those old-fashioned ideas as well. So not all GPs are really open and sort of inviting those conversations. And that's why I would say, therapy, getting over the body trauma, the body memory, it's a really, really long process. And when you watch TV, we don't have reference points. We don't have role models. And
We don't.
we don't know how to have a sexually healthy relationship because there's no reference point out there. There's no information. So, of course, as Jayshree is saying, we end up self-harming, being celibate because it's the only option, it's the safer option, and it kills a part of our being. We are sexual beings. So, women I have spoken, I mean, there have been a few women who have kind of embarked on that journey to sexual healing, but I would say it's decades down the road, which is really, really sad. But that's what I've seen.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing that, Rita. And I have to agree with you on that. In my limited experience of working in this space, that is definitely something that women have pushed deep inside and are still not talking about until they have that space where they feel that they can open up because they're with people from a similar background and they don't feel judged. So, I've seen women holding on to old sexual trauma for number of years, decades even. So it's very, very sad. Jayshree, you wanted to say something as well.
Yes, because the irony in our culture is that Kama Sutra and tantric sex come from India, from the land of our ancestors. But yet, it's always the patriarchal society who sexually contain us. And we are supposed to be the sanskari, the good girl, and the good girl never speak about sex. So, as you said, and then you go to Bollywood and all these TV serials, abuse which is getting perpetrated for generation is being repeated in this TV serial. And it's always women who are kept shut, being subservient. That's the ideal girl that you should be. And anyone who stands up for herself, speak out, they are seen as bad girls because bad girls, these are the bad girls and everything. And it's like a really, how do you say, cognitive dissonance in a way, living this type of contradictions. And especially from our culture, as women we are told we need to do this and do this, but the core of our culture is patriarchal. And if they themselves, they don't know how to deal with that, what are the chances of us women? Because at the end of the day, we have to live in a society, in a community. There's rules and regulations that you have to abide to be seen like a sanskari, successful Indian woman. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, absolutely, Jayshree. It's a really important thing that you've raised there. So not only are South Asian women can be products of the abuse that our white counterparts face, there are so many added layers of complexity that our women also have to deal with. There is so much trauma and unhealed stuff going on that, it is slowly changing, but not quite enough, really, is it? So I'm going to move on to Bhavna at this point. What do you think needs to happen to better support our women, our South Asian sisters who are going through this abuse or on their recovery?
I'm going to answer that, but also pick up on the question about physical abuse and physical health and the way it impacts women, because I think there's a massive interplay between the mental health and the physical health. And obviously there's going to be a massive psychological and mental aspect to every kind of abuse that a woman or man may suffer. And whether it's diabetes or heart disease or kind of facial injuries in max facts or orthopedic injuries, there's domestic abuse in everything and everywhere in medicine, and it's something that we definitely need to pay attention to. And it's really important that we get that training out there and see it as our responsibility to pick up on it and actually to incorporate it as our routine inquiry. So every time a patient comes in, they should be asked about whether they're feeling safe at home, or in whatever sensitive way you can make it a discussion, a discussion point, but also making the effort to see the victim in the absence of the perpetrator. And in COVID, that's probably the only thing that's played to our advantage, because we have patient-only hospitals and GPs, and we can talk to people who might be suspected victims in a lot more of an open way, because it's more confidential, it's between yourself and them. In terms of what we need to do, there is a lot more that we need to do. There's a lot happening, and I'm really proud of the services that are being offered. And like Mina was saying, there's a lot of money that's gone into it, and the safeguarding work at the hospital that I'm based at in Manchester are working incredibly hard. But we need to be more aware of what domestic violence is in general as a society, understand how people may present. So, I think you were mentioning that you had some back pain, and somebody spoke to you about that. But also what makes it difficult for people to disclose, because there are lots and lots of barriers to that disclosure, be it cultural and be it religious, or the fact that you might even love the person who might be abusing you, which might not make sense to someone who hasn't been through that. But that's something that we need to be aware of, and have a familiarity with the services that we can offer. And I think the training is getting out there, and people are seeing it more and more as their responsibility. And as I say, the nurses in the hospital are absolutely fantastic, and doctors show great sensitivity, but we just need to know what's happening. We need a national kind of organisation for domestic abuse and violence. There are currently pockets of organisations who are all working so very hard, but I think it can make it a bit difficult to understand who to talk to and who to go to, even as a healthcare professional. But once we've kind of, I hope the government can put that money and that organisation into domestic abuse and how we can manage it as a society on a national scale. And that's where we'll be kind of moving forwards with how to help support victims of abuse.
Thank you, Bhavna, for that. So I'm just going to reiterate on that one point about the closeness of physical abuse and how closely is linked to our mental health and vice versa as well. And that's something that I certainly see a lot of in working with domestic abuse survivors, is that they do tend to have a lot of fibromyalgia, chronic pain issues, and that's from years and years. It's just ongoing. The effects of trauma are long lasting. It's not something that goes away once you leave the perpetrator. It can be long lasting. But the good thing is that healing is possible. And I want to move on to some of the more positive aspects of once you have left your perpetrator, what life has been like for you. So I want to put this question to Tina. What advice would you give to somebody who is going through abuse?
The advice I will give you: keep faith in you, stay strong. You will get out of the other end. Do not let them demoralize you. The only thing keep me going was my kids, my boys. And I said, and just to make sure I'm surviving day by day, month by month, year by year, I knew I'm going to get out of this relationship, but I didn't know how. I educated myself. I make sure my boys are safe, and I kept going. And there was a point in my life when I was trying to commit suicide. I said, if I kill myself, I kill my boys too, because I won't leave them with that monster. But then everywhere I go, I was being failed by police, and it was quite stressful time. But if I can do it, anybody can do it. Keep going, ask for help. 10 years ago, when I was going through, there was not much help around. But I'm going through PTSD. I'm taking lots of counseling now even. And I have remarried. I'm in a happy relationship. And do not let anybody destroy you. And I will always say to myself, I wanted to live my life on my terms, and which I'm doing now. And my boys have seen me. I have done the job for mom and dad both. The only relationship they have seen, mom. And I have been mom and dad both for them. It has been hard. Financially, I've worked 80 hours a week. But now I'm 49 years old, mortgage-free house, without any financial help from my ex. And if I can do it, you can do it. Do not let anybody doubt yourself. Be strong. Ask for help. Find the solution. Don't worry about anything. Just live day by day, and you will get there. Do not lose the hope.
Thank you so much, Tina. I just want to say how incredible and inspiring and strong you are. So thank you so much for sharing that empowering message for anybody who is listening, that there is hope. And I just want to add something in there with the statistics as well. So you mentioned about suicidal thoughts, and I just want to let anybody know, if they're listening, 16% of victims report that they have considered it. So you are not alone. It's quite normal part of your abuse experience when you're going through it. And also 64% of victims in one study develop PTSD. So these are the ongoing effects. So if you are one of those people, know that you are not alone. This is one of the consequences of going through abuse. So I just wanted to just highlight those figures and numbers. And I just want to put the same question to you, Jayshree. What advice would you give to anyone going through abuse?
You know, the thing that keeps us mute is shame and fear. And shame has been used as a leverage for decades, if not centuries, for women not speaking out. So as an advice, I would advise, but in a safe way, to own the shame, to really go down inside yourself and be vulnerable. And till you're not ready to face and own up to the shame that society has been labeling you with, there's never going to be a very real healing process. As regards to Tina, I don't have any children, which I'm very happy about, which I didn't have with my ex. And the thing that got me going was my spirituality and my mom. They were my inspiration. And going forward, I have stress issues and I intend to stay single. That's my choice. But then the way in our culture we are defined as being happy is always to have husband and the kids and everything around that. So I'm going to break the norm. I'm choosing to live life on my terms and being happy by myself. And I've got so many things to do. I always wanted to sort of set up an organizational charity. I don't know how it's going to be, but to start it in the UK and then to Mauritius, where I'm from. But it would be like giving support and advice about the recovery, because recovery is not stressed enough, and especially the health aspect. Because for me, as a legacy of abusive marriages I've been through, so I have chronic depression, anxiety, PTSD, fibromyalgia, overactive thyroid, diabetes, and all of them, they are always keep fluctuating because my body and my mind's been on some level since childhood. And now, finally, at this age where I'm trying to get some kind of stability in my life, my whole immune system is being compromised. My health is being compromised. But you know that it was a very hefty price to pay for where I am in the now. I don't regret it, even though I'm sad and upset about wanting to do more, but I can't because of my health. I'm still optimistic. So any advice would be to go and document and educate yourself, because the other thing that's not stressed enough is that words like stonewalling, triangulation, these are not present in our native language. And I'm sure in Gujarati or Indian language as well, they don't have those definitions like stonewalling. What would you call that in Hindi, Gujarati, or whatever language? So you have to educate yourself, because had I not accessed counseling and freedom program, I wouldn't have happened to know what has happened to me from my past. Because from the education I got, then I got to know and understand what has happened to me so many years. So education is the key thing. Know about your rights and be brave to stand up and face the world. That's my advice.
That's incredible, Jayshree. That's so inspiring to hear. And I love that you want to set up a charity or an organization where you can help women, and you're using your experience and your adversity to, build something positive. And I just absolutely love that. And I wish you all the success with that. And you're absolutely right. It's so important to educate yourself and learn about what is abuse, what are the signs of it, what are the red flags, because a lot of women are living with it and don't even realize that they are in abusive relationships. So if something doesn't feel right, just don't second guess yourself, look it up, start getting informed, start talking to people, because the thing is, more people are open to this now than they used to be, especially in our culture. I know there's still taboos, but there are so many services out there. There's people like Hope Train, there's people like myself, there's so many charities and organizations, Southall Black Sisters, there's so many other organizations where you can pick up the phone, you can talk to somebody who will listen without judgment. So it's really key to understand what those signs and red flags are. Rita, is there anything you would like to add to them from your experience?
Yes, I think it's important to remember that when we talked about sexual abuse and physical abuse, that ultimately it's all about control and power and messing with your head. So, abusers are not raving lunatics. They don't have two heads. They're perfectly ordinary looking people. In fact, they're very liked, highly esteemed members of our society and our world. So I think it's important to remember that anybody is capable of being an abuser, and it's called the charm syndrome. So they can be very, very charming in terms of outward appearances. So for the victims, I think, it's all about the power and messing with confidence levels and your head. So I would always say, and women often said to me, coming out of refuges, how do I know the next relationship isn't going to be an abuser? What do I do? How do I know? How do I get out of it? And I always said to them, trust yourself, which is what you were saying earlier. I mean, they're listening to the clues. And I think as women, we're not empowered to believe in us. So it's really important that we tune into ourselves and say, if this doesn't feel right, I need to pick up the phone and speak to someone. And maybe you might not get the help you need the first time around, but there is Women's Aid Refuge Helpline, which is open 24/7. People can Google if they have access to a phone, or tell a friend, just tell someone. I think that's the first thing, because once you start talking, then that journey, the first step has been taken, and that journey towards getting help, you're well on the way. So I think it's about power. It's not about just physical abuse and hurting someone. Anybody can be an abuser. 1 in 4 or 5 women are affected at some point in our lives. So we need to be kinder to each other, start listening, and trust ourselves.
And I think trust your gut feeling.
Yes, yeah, exactly.
I have remarried. I knew I'm not going to go out with someone who even speak down at me. I'm out of that relationship. I don't care within 1 month. But I'm lucky enough to find such a nice person in my life. and I'm blessed.
Thank you, Tina. Now, we're coming towards the end of the panel, so I just want to thank all of our guests today for their wonderful input. It's really insightful, and I hope anybody who is listening out there, if you do feel that something is off in your relationship or something doesn't feel right, please listen to your gut feeling. There is help out there. There are safe spaces where you won't be judged. Please do reach out, because healing is possible, as you've seen with Jayshree and Tina's incredible, empowering stories, that, it's not forever. You can get out. There is a way out. So please, if you do feel you need to speak to somebody, there is help out there. So thank you all very much for this panel discussion today, and we'll be ending there. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you to the